Hello, everyone. My name is McElveen Neal, Managing Editor at the Haitian Times. Thank you for joining us for another community conversation featuring the candidates for District 45, New York City Council District 45. As the elections approach on June 22nd, we wanted to make sure that we took time for um, the candidates who are running and hope to be elected to tell you about themselves and to help you make an informed decision. As many of you know, the races this year, the primaries are June 22nd. And this year, for the first time, New York City is moving to ranked choice voting, meaning that you will have to choose your favorite candidate in order of preference, with your first, being marked as your number one choice, and then going down the list to your second, third, fourth, or fifth. So we wanted to make sure to give you that reminder up front to make sure that you register and you're prepared to cast your ballot come June 22nd. Tonight, we are joined by three candidates for District 45. They are, in order on my screen, Lou Cespedes, Cyril Joseph, and Anthony Bedford. They are running to represent the district that encompasses the neighborhoods of Flatbush, East Flatbush, Midwood, Marine Park, Flatlands, and Kensington. We will let each of you tell the audience a little bit about yourselves and why you think you're the best candidate to represent this district. But before you do that, I'll just give a brief bio of each of you so that everyone knows who everybody is. I'll start in order, in alphabetical order here with last name. Anthony Beckford is the first one. He is a single father, disabled U.S. Marine Corps veteran, community leader, ordained minister, former UFT member, Freelancers Union member, and a committee member of the elected Kings County Democratic Party, as well as a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. Anthony is also the president and co-founder of the Black Lives Matter Brooklyn chapter and the president of the Brooklyn Sector Cop Watch Patrol Unit. So far in this race, he's been endorsed by New York Communities for Change, Concerned Citizens for Change, and a few others, including the League of Human Voters, the New York Caribbean Unity Alliance, and Brooklyn Progressive Alliance. To find out more about Anthony Beckford, simply go to anthonybeckford.com, and we'll drop that link in the chat for everyone to go and visit his website. The next person here we have is Luz Cespedes Fernandez. He is a Cuban-American native of New York City, a graduate of Pratt Institute School of Architecture. And so he's well-versed in building and affordable housing. When we get to that point, I'd love to hear his thoughts on some of the models we're seeing. As a building professional, he has practiced in New York, Vienna, and most recently in Mexico. He's an urban and homeowner advocate focused primarily against rezoning efforts in East Flatbush. He works to improve housing access and private property literacy, which are all very important. Mr. Fernandez's recent zoning and technical work with Pratt Center for Community Development resulted in a pilot program for East New York to legalize basement and cellar apartments. It will be interesting to hear more about that. And now this initiative is expected to be passed by the state legislature for implementation statewide. So lots of questions there when we get to the portion about affordable housing. Last but not least is Mr. Cyril F. Joseph. Mr. Joseph is a man who has experienced homelessness, poverty, and the challenges of living as an undocumented immigrant in America. Throughout his life, he has worked to bring jobs, housing, and rights to people experiencing hardship by building relationships, nonprofits, and grassroots activism. In 2004, he discovered an unused plot of land in Bushwick and transformed it into the Secret Garden. It's now a thriving green space where low-income New Yorkers could access free food and connect with one another. Cyril has served as executive director of the Ocean Hill Bushwick Bedford Stuyvesant Local Development Corporation and is one of the original founders of the New Kings Democrats, which is a club that's considered to be part of the city's progressive left. But more, I think, most relevantly for everyone, Mr. Joseph Cyril has served as a member of Community Board 4 for the past 25 years, where he has been a member of the Housing and Land Use Committee, Economic Development, Youth and Education, Health and Hospitals, and Civil and Religious subcommittees. So lots of experience there. His website, for those who are interested, are cyrilforcitycouncil.com. We'll also put that in the chat for you to check out when you have a moment. So with that, we'll get started. And I think I'd like to start with what's top of mind for so many of us, and that's the verdict we saw yesterday in Minneapolis, convicting former police officer Derek Chauvin in the murder of George Floyd. I'd like to get your thoughts each individually on just the Black Lives Matter movement, the verdict itself, and what this means for our community. I think I'll start with Anthony Beckford, since you are so involved in the Black Lives Matter movement in Brooklyn.
Yes, thank you, and thank you, to Haitian Times for having me here today. Um, it's a very victorious moment for us, yet we're still taking it with caution because we still have the sentencing portion coming up. I've worked with many of the families and help advocate for many of the families here in Brooklyn and throughout New York who have lost their loved ones to police violence. And we've even seen with Akai Gurley, where Officer Peter Liang, even though he was convicted, he wasn't given any jail time. He was still given house arrest, community service, and probation, which was insult upon injury. So we're waiting to see exactly what goes on with the sentencing. We know that the power of the people is what made that verdict happen. We know that, the 17-year-old young sister that recorded that video and had the bravery to put it out there so the world could see, this modern day lynching, we know that it was it was her who set this in motion to make sure that justice, came about. But then also a lot of people were able to voice their opinion that, the public jury, us as people in all communities were able to see the injustices. And that brought out, even more allies to our community to say enough is enough. We literally saw 8 minutes and 46 seconds of pain that we've been facing for over 400 plus years, and that whole diaspora, where we are affected by systemic racism and systemic violence, and more needs to happen. There needs to be more. Just one officer will not do it. There's still officers out there committing egregious acts against the people, especially our undocumented, immigrant community members, because they know that they could get away with it at times. There's so many things that need to be put in place, and not just reform. We need enforcement of accountability measures. For too long, we've been calling for reforms. We said, okay, let's get them body cameras. But we've seen that we've given them body cameras, and we've seen that they've gotten away with a lot of these acts. We even have body camera footage of what happened to Dante Wright, but yet they still argue with us what their narrative is when we've all seen what the true narrative was. What we need is enforcement. We need to make sure that community policing is complete. People of our communities policing each other, not outside force that is occupying our communities, that provides a great deal of danger to us, and also promotes the mass incarceration rate that happens in our communities, instead of us providing the resources and services that are needed. And being the president and co-founder of Black Lives Matter Brooklyn, I've been a part of this fight since I was 12 years old. So coming into this is just a new era of the civil rights and human rights movement and fight that we've been going throughout this country and throughout the whole world for, Eric Garner said it himself, with his last breaths, is enough is enough. And I don't know how many times we're going to keep on saying that. but the people are very serious now. They're not just providing lip service. We're providing action. We're putting legislation into place. I'm happy that at least in New York City, and New York State, I was able to help, push along a lot of the legislation that we received that did bring about accountability. Now I have proposals, which is a part of my Cop Watch bill that I'm ready to introduce within my first 60 days that will actually bring about the accountability that we need, but then also it will make sure that we as Black people here in New York City, and even hopefully it could go throughout the state and also on the federal level as well too, are protected. We have so-called rights, but we're not truly protected. We're not protected against hate crimes, and we're not protected against, police brutality. We're not even protected against the own brutality that we face from a lot of our elected officials, through financial injustice and so much more. It is time for us to have justice.
All right. Thank you, Anthony. I have a couple follow-up questions for you, but before we get into them, let's hear from Mr. Cespedes. Lou, what do you have to say about what we've all witnessed in the past year that culminated in yesterday's verdict?
Well, first, bonsoir. Que Dieu vous bénisse tous. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lou Cespedes. God bless you. My thoughts about the trial and the verdict are fleeting. I don't have any certainty that this verdict will stick. There are built-in flaws in how the judge ruled right after the murder of Dante, when the jury was asked to be sequestered, and the judge denied that motion. So I agree with Anthony. I think that we have to be cautiously optimistic, but there is still a long process ahead of us. And what we've seen on the streets since Mr. Floyd's murder last summer is something that, although necessary, I don't necessarily agree is going to bring us to a solution that brings justice to our community. The Black Lives Matter movement is a movement that has grown and has matured over the last 5 years since the Obama presidency. It has become a political arm. It is far more effective today than it has been in its beginnings. But we have to remember that what Anthony is talking about does not come from protest. The rights and the power that we as a community need will only come when our Black money matters, when our votes matter, and when we have a unified agenda. We don't have that currently. I think that is evident not only in the macro politics of our country, but also in the micro politics of our district. The 67th precinct is one of the precincts with the highest rates of false arrests. They have participated in the killing of several young men in our district, some with mental illness. And although I know that we have new leadership at the 67th precinct, I have yet to see any evidence that there have been changes on the ground. And so we as a community need to understand that we're not gonna have justice until we demand justice of our own elected officials. We're not gonna have justice until we require accountability from our business community, until we have jobs, until we have proper security, until we have an informed agenda that we can share to build our community and our infrastructure, not only here, but also at home. We need to see what is happening in our home countries that are driving, that is the driving force behind immigration. And we need to defend the rights of immigrants that are here. So on many of the points that Anthony mentioned, I agree. But I think the means to achieve them, I think we differ on significantly.
So yes, I'd love to hear more about that, how you all differ and why you think your proposal may be the better plan for our communities. But before we do that, let's go to Cyril Joseph. Cyril, you've been here since the 60s, and from what I read, you were a migrant worker yourself and worked your way up to an education, a community, grassroots organizer roles with nonprofits. Tell us what you've experienced from the 60s as a Black man, an immigrant person at that.
Yes, I am proud that I'm glad to hear that Anthony and my other young man, Louis, brought up this idea of injustice. When you talk about injustice, injustice is not only Black life. And I am proud that there's a so-called group saying Black Lives Matter. But we got to look at the difference. It's not only Black people who have been pushed through the grinder or the injustice. Look at the crimes that's been committed against Asians right now. You cannot walk in a train station. You cannot walk on the streets. You have people that slapping, killing. You have the Jews that have been persecuted. So let's get this thing straight. Black lives matter. All lives matter, regardless to class, color, or creed. That's simple. Talking about immigrants, I came here to the United States in the early 60s as a migrant worker, and the injustice that's been placed upon migrant workers from all over the Caribbean islands was horrific. Immigration was you talk about immigration is there's no comparison with the 60s, 70s, and the 80s to the way that ICE, Immigration and Naturalization Services, used to follow and arrest immigrants. You could not sit in a bar taking a good drink and keep your glass still. You could not walk in groups of no more than two, because as they see that, they come and arrest you. They know who you are. We're talking about legislation for immigration reform. You know, legislation for immigration reform, we are seeking to be elected legislators, not politicians. Because I tell anybody, I am not a politician. I'm a community activist. And if you're going to look for someone to craft legislation, we are lawmakers. We need to craft legislation that will change the language of what we are saying and let people know we mean what we are saying. I used to be a police officer in my country and in the state of Florida. And I knock on wood, thank God, that the thing I call CPR, courtesy, professionalism, and respect. There is no such thing. These policemen today do not even know the true meaning to CPR. They believe CPR is just when somebody is sick, they press. But courtesy, professionalism, and respect. You have to have courtesy throughout your entire police department. You have to act in a manner that is professional. And respect is due to everyone, regardless of class, color, or creed. I am glad that Anthony is spearheading the Black Lives Matter. And if we look at all those people that was advocating or protesting are not just Black people. They wasn't just protesting just against for Black people. You see black, blue, green, all nationalities holding that flag and saying injustice was not the way that our forefathers meant for it. I am proud.
Go back, sorry, to something you said earlier, right? The whole point about Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter. I mean, you do understand why people are making that that outcry, right? No one is saying that Asians and Jews aren't affected by racism and discrimination, right? But you have seen the stats around how disproportionately Black and brown people, which include Latinx and Asians, are impacted by police brutality and systemic racism, right? I just want to make sure we're clear on, you know, Black Lives Matter and what that movement stands for, and All Lives Matter before we move on.
Right.
So, with that said, I think Anthony, you had mentioned something about your cop watch, proposal that you say would be something, a bill you would try to push through. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, but first I just want to say that clarify two things. You know, Haitians are Black people, and when it comes to legislation, a lot of times it does take us holding the feet of these legislators to the fire by putting the movement out there, going directly to their doors, showing up to their offices, like we've done with many of them, like from the governor to city council members to the mayor, to make legislation happen within the city. I myself have had everybody from the mayor and everybody else contact me about what can we do to make things better for the people, because they understand what the people power is. You know, everything runs from people power, whether it be union rights, whether it be worker rights, whether it be immigration rights, you know, and so forth. It's always people power. But in regards to cop watch, so being a cop watcher means that I get to record. It is my, my First Amendment right to be able to do so, my constitutional right. But we've had that violated so many times. Now we have a bill that says, people can still, record the officers. And if the officers, try to stop you from recording, then, you could file a lawsuit against them. But then it's still the basis of you providing evidence. But even providing evidence, a lot of times, depending on who your judge is, depends on how far that goes. Depending on how much the city comes at you, depending on how far that goes. With my cop watch bill, not only would it provide, basic civil rights and also constitutional protections, federally, because we'll be working with our state and federal legislative partners on this, because we have to work on all levels to get things done for our people, but it will also bring accountability to the point where now we can say, okay, we're going to dock this certain amount of days without pay from you. Now, not just putting you through training, because the training is not the issue. The training has always been there, and retraining just teaches them the same thing, But when you start messing with the money, when you start messing with the promotions, that's when they start acting right. It's the same thing like when our parents tell us, don't touch that stove because you're going to get yourself burned. And many people had to learn the hard way. This right here is what you call the act right. But then when it comes down to the civil lawsuits that the city pays out, the billions of dollars that the city pays out per year for lawsuits, which is our tax dollars, my cop watch bill will actually take 35% of the officer's pension to pay towards that civil lawsuit. Guarantee you, these officers would think twice in regards to that. What it will also do is hold the PBA, which is the Police Benevolent Association, whose president, Pat Lynch, has a habit of calling Black youth mutts and degrading Black people. It will hold them accountable once he decides that he wants to come out to make a statement, or they decide to make a statement as well. Because now they become complicit in the act, in the cover-up of human rights violations and the cover-up of civil rights violations. We have to take a drastic step forward, or as many will call a radical step forward, in making sure that we have true accountability, not just talks about it. We've seen too many forums and too many panels, too many town halls. We've seen a lot of speak outs about it, but it's time to put it into legislation. We've had a lot of elected officials come out there wearing "I Can Breathe" shirts while they're supported by the PBA, who mocked Eric Gardner with "I Can't Breathe" shirts. You know, it is time for us to go out there and make this happen. But we can't make it alone as legislators. It takes the people. It takes the grassroots organizations. It takes some of these nonprofit organizations. It takes many of the independent and co-op group organizers, you know, like NYCC, you know, like Cotwash Patrol Unit, like Equality for Flatbush, and many other organizations that's been out here, boots on the ground on the front lines, to work with the legislators to make it happen. Even CPR groups like NYC Shut It Down have been out there consistently causing disruptions and civil disobedience to bring awareness to the consistent murders that's been happening, the police violence against Black bodies, and not just here in New York City. Because when we only think about self, that's when we get disrupted and distracted. We have to look at the fact that what we do here in New York, many other cities and states do follow. They look at us as an example. So with us doing what is right as legislators, as true activists, as true advocates and vital voices out there in the community, we'll be able to make an impact in New York City and have it, you know, expand out throughout this country. A lot of people are looking at us to do the right thing.
Okay, so what would you have these organizations do? I mean, they're so busy trying to provide services, you know, to people who are really in need. What exactly would your ask be of them to support your proposals, your legislation?
It'll be the same thing that they've been doing for the whole time now. You know, all these organizations have been out there fighting against, you know, police brutality, fighting against injustices, fighting for criminal justice reform. So what it will be, it was just for them to continue with the support the legislation, come out as many of us did when we had the stop and frisk that Jumaane Williams had introduced, to stop and frisk within New York City, to come out and be the voice. Because then when people see the support, when other legislators see that massive support behind this legislation, that's how legislation moves. That's how the city council speaker will not be able to silence your legislation and have it die within the committees. It will actually be able to move forward, you know, but then also they'll be able to contact, you know, and do phone banking and do text banking like all of us have done. Visit the offices like we've been doing with Carl Hasty and many others, you know, in the state as well too, to be able to say, this is what we want. Because then you'll be able to garner more support and even gain more co-sponsors for your legislation as well. You know, 26 is a magic number, you know, for a good legislation call. 32 means that you have a good veto power over the next mayor. You know, so even if the mayor decides, no, let's shut this legislation down, if you have 32 council members that said, no, this legislation needs to move forward, it will move forward. We have to keep the people in mind, and that has to be the priority.
Okay, so I think I understand. It would just be asking them to help mobilize their memberships and show strength in numbers in terms of support.
Yes, that, and also being at the table to help draft a lot of this legislation as well too.
Mm-hmm.
I can't, if I may, I don't know if it's my turn to speak.
No, sure, go ahead. I was just
if I may, I just want to draw a very clear distinction here. Although, you know, Anthony's a friend and Mr. Joseph, you know, will someday be my friend. I just want to be clear that I am not an activist. I do not believe in protest as a means of resolving conflict, particularly of the policing kind. And so if we want to take steps within the framework that we've been given to address police reform, Governor Cuomo, I believe last spring, offered a path for community groups to propose reforms within their precincts. I don't believe that Anthony or anyone else that performs as an antagonist of the police is a good faith interlocutor to have those kinds of negotiations within our precincts or within our community. And so as a businessman, as someone that is keenly aware that we need to have on a strategic approach to solving police reform, I would tell you that we begin first with the clergy. And so the 67 Precinct Clergy Council, the so-called God Squad, is, I think, the biggest impediment and also the biggest potential solution to the policing problem. So if you want to start with building critical mass, you have to start with the congregations. And I'll just give you a very simple example. In the Jewish community, they have their own police. It's called the Shomrim. And the Shomrim is a wing established and supported within the NYPD. And there is no reason why we cannot have a similar structure within our own communities. The reason why the Shomrim exists is because they argue that only their people are equipped to handle the cultural sensitivities that are required to police their own communities. I believe that we can also use that same logic. And so if we approach this with math, if we approach this with reason, and we approach it with the critical mass that's already built into our community, the common denominator is that we all, most of us, share a common faith. And so if we move on faith and we work with faith to resolve policing issues in our community, protest is only one part of the solution, but it cannot be the only part of the solution. The other part of the solution is hard negotiation, is planning, is building critical mass and support within large sectors of the community to demand that we get the kind of representation and policing that we need to keep our community safe.
All right, so I think we have a question from someone in the audience around this, and then I think we should just close this part and move on to some other topics we need to cover. But we have someone who's asking, what is your stance on community control of the police? And by that, the attendee is talking about the budget and leadership, right? And so I think this is important. And Lou, I'd like to go to you first, because you did mention that, the 67th precinct, for example, has new leadership, right? And I think you meant some of the Haitian Americans who've been promoted recently at the beginning of the year to those leadership roles in the 67, but you haven't seen yet those any impact on the ground, right? So
I haven't seen the success of community policing in our district, and I suspect that we won't see it because there are so many other missing components that are needed to complete that puzzle. But I mean, I really don't know if there is a question there. I didn't really grasp the question.
So there are a couple questions, right? Like one, when you have people who look like you, right, in terms of those Haitian Americans I mentioned, right, they've been in their roles since, say, January, February to be exact. Granted, they've been police officers for much longer than that. How long would you give them to actually start seeing the impact on the ground? Like, what were you looking to see happening on the ground in terms of their activities?
Well, I think again, this is a great question. So if you're asking how long should I give them, the answer is I should see results on the ground immediately. And why? We have predominantly Haitian leadership at all levels in this district. So if Rodney's, Farah, Matthew Eugene cannot come up with a comprehensive strategy to address police reform and leadership after the so many years that they've been in office, then I seriously doubt that they have the capacity to do it now. And so, you're not seeing results on the ground for the very same reasons that you're not seeing Farah at this forum, right? They don't have answers. And so how can we expect a different outcome when we are always depending on the same people to provide us answers and they're not forthcoming? So simply put, if I were a leader in this district, which I hope to be, the first thing that I would do is create outreach programs with the clergy and the youth, because what we need to do is we need to address youth violence in our community. We need to give kids something to do, and we need to give them a pathway to jobs and careers. If you don't solve that problem, then you're not going to solve the policing problem, and you're not going to solve the problem of violence. I mean, that should be pretty clear, right? So let's not put the cart before the horse. This is not what the issues that we're facing in our community are not going to be solved via policing. They're going to be solved by creating programs, by putting in the critical infrastructure that we need to give our kids a chance to prosper and to give them and to give our people the opportunity to work.
Mm-hmm. So point well taken around this not being just a policing issue, but deeper seated than that. So going back to the first question I started out with, because I want to make sure we address this for the attendee we have here. How would you then, right, control, what is your stance? And I'll go to each of you on controlling the actual budget of the New York City Police Department, whether that's at the local level or at a higher citywide level.
So just to give you a clear answer, my position on policing has been to defund half of the police budget, of the overall police budget, over the next 4 years. So $3 billion over the next 4 years, and it will happen in stages. And that money should be earmarked for precisely those programs that I'm talking about within marginalized communities.
May I?
Yeah, and then Anthony, if you could wrap us up after.
Okay.
Yeah, you're asking about how we would control the police budget. My take on the policing budget, you could defund the police budget, but increase the mental health issue. Because defunding the police department or the budget and not putting money into mental health training and mental health awareness is waste of time. You have more mental health people out here, kids out here, who need the attendance or the I would say attendance or the training of mental health professionals. Rather than just letting the police lock them up and send them to prison, give them a mental health place. Now, Louis just spoke about jobs. And that's why I said, as your city council legislature, we are going to start the vocational training center. And a vocational training center is not like a community center. It's a place where you build high-paying jobs. You train these kids or youth in high-tech jobs, and you give them the on-the-job training. You then go to your small business and offer them a TJTC for hiring your kids. That's the way we're going to start doing it. And you're talking about the clergy council. I mean, the clergy council in the 67 precinct council must be revamped. I am glad to see that they have new leadership in there. But what they need to do is pass the baton on to those officers that they just promoted, the Haitian officers, the Black policemen. Give them the power, give them the authority. You have the youth council, give them the power, give them the authority to go forward and get more community policing involved. Get them out of these cars and put them on the street that they could know the community, and don't keep changing them, just putting in cars, putting in cars, putting in cars. That's the way we could solve this problem.
Okay. Anthony, what say you?
Okay, so this is a very good question. This is a question that we've been asking around the movement for a while now. We've conversed with many about this, especially elected officials. We do, I do support community control of the police. But then also, when it comes to defunding, let's be very specific about the language, because we just had a defunding, quote unquote, of $1 billion in the last city council budget, but all that was just a change of hands. You know, the funding is still there. Matter of fact, the police went above their budget due to overtime costs. And we're able to purchase a $75,000 DigiDog that they don't have in no other communities but the Black community. That's literally 2 after-school programs right there, okay? So when we're gonna defund, let's make sure that we make a clear path. Yes, I agree with what each of the other candidates said. We need to make sure that the funding go towards program that's needed. Mental health, healthcare services, we need after-school programs, we need summer programs, we need to put the funding towards childcare, we need to make sure that we have hazard pay for our essential workers, we need to make sure that we bring vocational training back into our schools, but also provide the resources that are needed to bring about, you know, the deep, you know, take away the crowding of our schools and stop these co-locations of our schools that's happening. But then we also need to bring trade schools back to our communities. We need to have a pathway to unionized jobs. We need to get rid of the school to prison pipeline that exists. That means removing police officers out of our schools. That means removing police officers out of homelessness, removing police officers out of mental health calls. You know, that means getting them out of these different categories that our city has placed them in, that provided nothing but policing and actually caused more rates of brutality and even more higher rates of deaths and racial profiling of our youths and even of our seniors as well too. We have to be very serious about this. And if we're going to talk about offering these youths jobs, let's make sure that we offer them jobs that have a livable wage, because many times these youths are the ones to earn income for their families, because many of their families are disabled or undocumented. We just got the funding for excluded workers. Imagine what was going on before that. You know, we have to expand on the SYEP program, not just on the funding for it, but expand on the amount of youth that we employ within it. Talk with more of the small business owners to get the youth employed, because then that will also empower the small business owners. That will keep them from going bottoms up, being the fact of what we just seen over this pandemic now, with no relief for our small business owners. But that will also keep the youths off of the streets. I'm out here every day with these youths. I'm out here every day with the youth in Glenwood Houses, in Vanderveer, which is now called Flatbush Gardens, with those on Newkirk and in the 20s. You know, I'm out there in the 50s with the youth out there. I could walk amongst them because they know I understand where they're coming from. And I've been advocating for them for so long. At the age of 12 years old, when my advocacy started, I fought to stop the racist rezoning that occurred in our school district, which one of them is District 18. And a 12-year-old was able to make that victory happen to stop that, which would have meant more funding out of our schools. We've been fighting for so long, and it was the boots on the ground that made these legislation and these changes happen. So let's make sure it happens. Let's make sure we do have control of the police. Let's make sure we do have control of their budget. We're looking at over $6 billion militarized budget. I'm a military veteran. There's no reason why they should be having a Stingray machine that literally duplicates the towers, the cell phone towers, so that way they could basically spy on your phones and get your text messages and get your phone calls. There's no reason why they should have the strategic response group out there, which I call Bratton bullies, because he's the one who put them into place, out there brutalizing peaceful protesters, especially Black women organizers. There's no way that Terrence Monahan should have been allowed to resign from the chief of detectives when he was the one that was out there yanking on Black women's hair and beating them. There's so much accountability that has to go from the bottom up and top down. And we have to make sure that we don't allow for there to be a CCRB that has no teeth. We need an ECRB, which is an elected community review board that will literally have decision process and will bring accountability and make sure they have adequate funding. We don't need an agency that has people appointed from the mayor, from the public advocate's office, you know, from the police commissioner's office. We already know where the bias is going to be. It's going to be based on politics and favors and backdoor deals.
Okay. Guys. I just sorry, I have to interject here because it's 7:45 and we've been only discussing one topic since we started. I'm gonna ask Mac kindly to keep time because
can I reclaim my time?
This is getting out of hand. We have one.
Can I reclaim my time, please?
We have one topic. We have one topic that we've covered.
And yeah, if you need to go, it's fine. But I think this is a very important topic for our community. You know, Black and brown people are dying disproportionately. We have to figure out how to work with the police. Crime in our community, you know, murder rates doubled in New York City all of last year, and we're still seeing the impact now. So I understand we have a lot of issues to cover, but it is important. And as
I totally agree. I'm just saying we need equal time so that we can all share in these point of views and have a healthy debate here.
Yes, do wrap up your answer, but I do have just one more thing to add, and then we'll close out this topic. So
Thank you.
Before you close out, may I ask a question, please? Not ask a question. May I just comment on something that Anthony talked about, the SYEP program? That is Summer Youth Employment Program.
Hold on. Anthony, were you finished? Do you want to finish up what you were saying really quickly, please? Or are you done?
No, I'd like to finish. Okay, thank you.
Just make it brief, because it's true, we are short on time.
No, definitely. You know, but you know, like I said, you know, we do need to have greater control, because there's no control. We don't, you know, only the police commissioner has firing power. Many of the accountability measures are done behind the closed doors. There's no transparency. We didn't make sure that we bring the firing power to the council as well, so that way the council is able to determine it. But then also that will put the council members at a point of accountability as well too, to make sure that they do the right thing by the people who they represent.
Okay. Well, thanks for that. And I think my next question is going to be for all of you, right? As first-term council people, how would you actually go about making these plans, you know, turn into legislation? How would you go about either forming coalitions with people or pushing through some of these plans that you're proposing? It's very difficult, my understanding, from my understanding, that it is harder for first-term representatives to actually get things done. So what is your plan for making these proposals turn into actual legislation? And Lou, since you really wanted to go ahead.
Well, that's a great question. I don't think legislation is required. So what we need to do here is we need to think of our community as an asset. We need to think of our community as a functioning organism that is living and breathing and has a portfolio. If we don't think about our community as a business, we will not succeed. And so here's the simple answer. You do not solve all problems through legislation. You solve some problems through legislation, and legislation should facilitate action on the ground. So what is the principal issue that we have in our community, or one of the principal issues that we have in the community? One of the issues that I believe that are immediate, need to be immediately addressed, is that our business community is failing dramatically. If you look at the avenues, our businesses are failing. They're closing. Real estate is running rampant. Land use is the critical issue that we face in our community. It is the lens through which all other issues need to be gauged. And so if we don't solve the land use issue, if we don't solve the issue of equity for our businesses and employment, then you can do all the legislation you want. It's not going to solve the problem, and the legislation takes way too long. So let's just focus on one specific example. PPP was not adequately distributed in our community. One, because the businesses did not have banking history and they were mostly predominantly informal businesses. Political leadership did not lend the proper infrastructure to those people and to those businesses so that they could formalize in an adequate period of time. Banking was not there for you because you were either not a client because you're a cash business, or because you're operating with fewer than the number of employees that you needed to qualify. No one was there to walk people through the process, right? And so our community was left without PPP support, like most Black communities were. Do you solve that through legislation? No, you can't solve that through legislation. You can only solve that through advocacy. You can only solve that through education. You can only solve that through training and by providing critical infrastructure in your communities in support of businesses. So I will say, why didn't Habnet step up to the plate? Where was Habnet when you needed them? And if you look at one specific example, right, which I like to use, is the Caton Market, right? The Caton Market is the prime example of systemic business failures that we're seeing in our community because of lack of leadership from our electeds, and also because we lack critical infrastructure to help our own businesses and to understand how our businesses operate. I could talk about informal street vendors. I could talk about dollar cab drivers. I could talk about dollar vans. The same problem exists. These are all cash businesses. These are businesses that operate on a micro level that have almost no employees. And so if we don't start becoming a little bit more organized about how we develop our own community, then we're simply going to see the same problems recurring. So I don't need legislation to solve that problem. I'm a project manager. I'm a businessman. I know how to solve that problem on day one because I know how to solve problems. I'm an engineer. That's what I do for a living. So
then I'm a little bit stumped because if you're not going to city council to, push through legislation, then what are you going there to do? You can do.
So what is it? So what is it? What is the
that you mentioning?
What is the primary role? What is the primary role of a city council person is to control, one, a discretionary budget, which, by the way, your paper reported that Farah is taking out more than 4/5 of the money that she gets in discretionary funds from the community. Your paper reported that, and if you're not using that discretionary slush fund to invest in the infrastructure in your community, then that's the first problem. Second, I do plan on putting forward legislation, and I have put forward legislation, but that legislation needs to address specific problems that can be tackled. So it's not a tool, it's not a catch-all to solve every problem. So if you want to talk about housing, we can put forward legislation that empowers homeowners. If you want to talk about youth, we can put forth legislation that addresses the needs of our youth community, our senior community. If you want to talk about land use, and you want to talk about how rezoning is going to affect our community, we can put forward legislation that addresses that. But we cannot legislate our way to solving every problem. You need management, you need ideas, and you need to know how to implement a project and complete it.
Okay, point well taken. Thanks for clarifying that. I thought you were saying you don't need legislation at all when you first came out with that initiative.
No, I'm simply saying, here, let me just give you one. Let me just give you, no, please, please, let me just give you one more quick example. One more quick example. I just want to it's important, and then I'll let you go. I want to do one more quick example. For years, since I've been here, politicians and would-be politicians have been talking about the trash problem. And they go out and they clean, here and there, and they promote it, and they say, oh, you're going to go out and do community cleanup. But that problem persists. It is there with us every day. When you go out on Nostrand Avenue, when you go out on Utica Avenue, you see trash is overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And if you're not faithful in the little things, if you can't solve that problem, then how can you solve the bigger problems?
Let me interject a little bit because I am being up here. Now, Louis said you cannot legislate.
He said not everything. He said there are some things you have to do at the local level.
But our main responsibility as city council members are legislators. We are not being elected as city council members as Republicans or Democrats. We are here to legislate. We are here to craft legislation. We are here to work across the aisle to give ideas and get our legislation pushed through. Now, you're talking about Europe. ULUP, that's ULUP. I could go on and tell about ULUP. You know, you don't need no politician, the mayor, or no one appointing heads of departments to be on the ULUP committee. You need an independent body to spearhead or to be watchdogs for the ULUP and the housing committee. You talk about trash, all these things need independent body. The CCRB need to be revamped. I mean, that's a time for us to, the few hours we have here tonight is not time enough for us to discuss the change that we need. And you could craft legislation, because that's what we are there for, legislation, to craft and pass legislation. You talked about Farrell Lewis taking that money and send over to the 34th City Council District. And she know why she did.
Cyril, let me just.
But it's accountability. It's
Cyril,
accountability.
I have to admit that we did
have discretionary funding.
remember, but
If I'm going to give you money, and I don't tell you to account for the penny I give you, so you're going to keep on doing it. It's accountability and truthfulness. That's all it is.
all right. So I had trouble hearing you because I think your line was going in and out, but I did want to mention, because a few of you have butted up, you know, why Miss Lewis isn't here. We did invite her, but we didn't get a response about her attendance. So
Who's surprised?
about that piece.
I'm not surprised.
We do have one
Shocking.
question, another question here.
Wait,
And
hold
it's
on.
different
I
from
didn't get to answer that
what I
question,
talked
though.
about, but the question is, what would be your legislation in your first year of being elected if you are elected to the District 45th seat?
Can I start with this one?
Your first year, what you
Go
would
ahead,
do in your
Okay.
first year?
Well, first, let me go back to what your original question was before, which was how would I get the legislation, push out legislation within my first year, which then ties into this question as well too. You know, it's about working with other council members, you know, to make sure that we get that legislation, like-minded people to co-sponsor your legislation. Right now, I'm building a coalition of other candidates throughout other districts who are like-minded, who agree on many of the issues. And we're basically making a pact for the people to say, these are the legislations that we will help each other out to co-sponsor once we get into the council to make it happen. But again, also it takes bringing a lot of organizations and the community to the table to be able to say, this is what we're looking to do. What are your thoughts on it? What changes you would like to make? You know, bring up the hearings so that way their voices can be heard, you know, and go from there. And making sure that the speaker, you know, because we tend to forget the speaker could kill your bill, could purposely kill your bill just because you don't agree with their budget process. You know, they could say, hey, I'll give you this X amount of dollars to your community if you decide to vote yes on this. Like as we've seen with the 4 new jails plan, you know, that happened in 2019. What needs to happen is that the speaker needs to know that they do not have control over us like that. That like the late great Shirley Chisholm, we must be unbought and unbossed. You know, we have to not take lobbying efforts and special interest efforts from those who do not have the people prioritized. Now, in regards to the next question, you know, as this question here is,
what would you push through in your first year? What
my first year would definitely be my housing justice bill, and also my cop watch bill. Housing is a very big issue out here. Our homeless rate has skyrocketed within the district. You know, displacements, you know, have increased drastically. You know, we within a 6-block radius of where I am, you know, right here in the community, we literally have about 20 developments and about that are already built and 5 that are right now being built. You know, many of them have been stalled due to the efforts of community members and community organizations saying, no, this is not happening. You
that is simply not true, Anthony. That is not true.
Lou, I'm going to ask you to respect my time so I can speak, please. I respected you. Respect me. Thank you.
That's not, I will
respect me as I speak, please.
Okay, Lou, you'll have time. Go ahead.
Okay. So as I was saying, talking about these developers that are displacing our community members and taking the homes away from our small homeowners and so forth. You know, we're seeing all of these are luxury apartments. None of them are affordable to our community members. Since when does $75,000 income anywhere near what many of our community members make? It's not the reality. You know, that's through the MIH, that's through the AMI. There's so many faulty, pieces that went into place from the governor and also from the mayor as well too. When you look at the average median income in certain parts of the district, it is not what these developers and a lot of these corporate landlords are asking for. And I'm not going to be friendly or pamper or appease to them by trying not to talk about the reality of the situation. You know, right now in our district, we have the number one worst landlord in New York City, Jason Korn, that owns 3 buildings that have mode that I've had to go into to advocate, one, against illegal evictions, which I even just got a text just now about another tenant that after this, I got to go help in regards to illegal eviction that's going on, but then also 2, in regards to the skyrocketing rent that is occurring. We need rent rollbacks. New York City has not had a rent rollback since 1971. Our small homeowners need property tax rollbacks, so that way they're not paying, they're not paying what from the 10-year tax relief that these developers are getting for building these monsters in our community that's rolled over to these small homeowners. We need to make sure that their property tax reflects their purchase value of their property. We need to make sure that we turn shelters into permanent housing. We need to make sure that we turn these abandoned hotels and many of these abandoned buildings into permanent housing. We need to increase and expand on the voucher program for our homeless community members. We need to make sure that we stop the privatization of public housing and protect Section 9, but also open back up the Section 8 program so that way more community members can afford to be in our community and no longer be displaced. I'm out here every single day with New York Communities for Change, with Make the Road and many other housing advocates, and seeing this from day one. We have to protect our community members. We can no longer go out there and give lip service and try to appease people by giving different answers to different things. We have to speak the truth to the matter. And the truth is, our community is in need, our community is in trouble, and we have to be there, not only just through legislation, but we must stand there as representatives for the people and show them that we will stand by them and make sure that they are protected, make sure that they are provided safe housing, but also make sure they're provided affordable housing as well too.
Okay. Lou, go ahead. You wanted to jump in on
let Mr. Cyril I'll close this one out.
No, I mean, you wanted to go, so go ahead and jump in.
So, Anthony's a good friend, and I can't help but, call out what I see as just complete flagrant inaccuracies in what he's saying, because you have to understand what's happening in our community before you can actually put forward legislation to solve the problem. So as the only person here who has actually worked on legislation for homeowners, and as the only person here who is actually a homeowner advocate, and probably, one of the few candidates that actually owns a home in this community, then I would like to tell you what the problems are and how we can address them. So first, I passed legislation to make cellar and basement in 2-family homes legal. That bill is now a pilot program in East New York, and it is before the state assembly in the Judiciary Committee to become a statewide bill to allow homeowners to use their entire house. You are taxed. You are taxed as a Class 1 property owner if you have a 1 or 2-family home in our district. You are taxed more aggressively than communities in Crown Heights or in Windsor Terrace. The Department of Finance taxes our community at the maximum, 20% every 5 years. We are now paying $7,000 plus a year in property tax. If you have a fixed income and you're a senior and you're a multi-generational family living in one roof, and you're paying $7,000 of income when your average income is $58,000 per year, guess what? You're underwater. And you don't know that, and most of these people don't know that they're not only tax stressed, but their properties are stressed because they don't have the financial wherewithal to maintain their properties. And so what you don't understand about zoning is that you are in a R6, and most of these properties are like a glass half empty, right? So if you have a glass of water that's half empty and you don't fill it, you're not making the full, you're not recovering the full profit that you get from your property. So if you're distressed and you don't understand that the land under your house actually costs more than the house that sits on it, you'll sell your house for pennies on the dollar to a developer who will come back and make a killing. And that is what you're seeing in our community. Those 6-story developments are actually in line with what's supposed to be happening zoning wise in our community. But if you don't understand that and you keep saying that what's happening out there is illegal and that you're going to put landlords in jail and that they're building luxury apartments, that misses the entire point. We are not remaining stakeholders in our own community because of ignorance, because we don't know what we're selling and we don't know what we own. And so simply put, if you're a homeowner and you're selling your house on pennies on the dollar, yes, a developer is going to come in and buy your land, and they're going to take advantage of the tax breaks that the state of New York legally affords them through the 421A program to be tax property exempt for the next 20 to 30 years. And yes, that property tax is going to be rolled over to us, the homeowners. And yes, the homeowner is going to roll that property tax over to the renter. And that is why our community is becoming unaffordable. But the solution to that is not to say, oh, we're going to stop development. That's impossible. That's like standing before a moving freight train. That doesn't happen in New York. But what you can do is become a stakeholder in your community. What you can do is understand your property. What you can do is invest in your property. If you're not able to do that, if you don't have the means to do that, then you will continue to lose your financial footing in this community because you will not be able to afford the homes that you live in. That's what it means to be house rich and cash poor. If you cannot hold, you will fold. And that is happening primarily with wood frame houses in our community. So when FARA and Community Board 17 talk about rezoning our community, what they're doing is they're talking about putting the gas on development on the main corridors in our community. And that will crush homeowners. It will crush you in a matter of within a decade, because the more units that come online that don't pay property tax, the higher your appraised value of your home will be and the higher tax you will pay. And so that is why it is critically important that we stop the rezoning. That is a legislative mechanism.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so just so I'm clear, you're saying stop the rezoning and also educate homeowners about what they can do with their homes and allow them to, I guess, get the most cash out of their homes that they can.
Absolutely.
Their basements and cellars.
Absolutely.
Okay. Is that your plan? I just want to be sure.
That is part of my plan. You know, I also put forward the idea of putting a neighborhood development corporation together that will only focus on empowering homeowners to become stakeholders in the development of their own property.
So how would you do that? Just really quickly, what would this development, homeowners development,
economic development corporation?
Yeah, how would you get it together and actually?
So for example, you know, a neighborhood development corporation would be in lieu of a bid, right? So you know, you have our bids that control commercial court, right?
Yeah.
So this would put the power in the lap of homeowners, right? To control what happens in their community. So their neighborhood, their homeowner associations, HOAs, that also have a business component. And that is not regulated by the state, it is not regulated by the city. So that allows private investors to come in. It allows you to remain a stakeholder in your home, and it allows you to control the air rights on your block. So that means you can use the air rights on your block to leverage your financing and to build and develop your own community block by block. So if you think of each block as its own individual corporation, that block has assets. That block has money sitting in outer space above the homes of current homeowners. And you can use that money to leverage against bank loans to finance the development of your own community. Right now, most of the homes in our community are 2 stories. You can build up to 6.
No,
Okay. Yeah, thanks for
I think it's time that I should have a say now because
no,
I
no,
I
it's
had-
your time. Go ahead.
I had a talking going between the 2 candidates, and I'm sitting back here and don't have a chance to say anything.
You got this, Mr. Joseph.
I think it's time to go in there. Now, I think the question was asked, what will you do or how would you legislate within your first year? What would you legislate?
Yeah,
in
the
your
key legislation pieces
Right.
you want to pass.
Number
the
one.
priorities.
My legislation in the first time I go in there is to have the other city council members come together and we craft legislations to change the Michilama law.
Mm.
That's number one. Number two, my next legislation is to craft and bring small business people at the small business department to protect small businesses within the district. Because the same way that they do it in Illinois, we could do it over here. Cut the red tape for small businesses to be able to sustain. I am tired of walking down the streets and looking at every business on the street locked up, closed down. Why? Because the business owners bring the rent skyrocketing, and the people cannot sustain their businesses. We got to realize that small business is more than 90% of the entire income within our district. They provide more jobs. The next thing that I heard Louis said is the air rights. And these folks are coming and buy the air rights because why they're doing it? They're going to look at the churches and look at the tall steeples in the church and buy air rights because of the steeple of the church. We need to craft legislation to stop this nonsense. And we as legislators could do that. Simple and plain, because don't tell me, Lou, you're going to look from here and look at a church down 45th Street with a steeple as 15 stories tall, and you're going to say, oh, because the church have the air rights 15 stories tall, I will come and buy here, which is a 5-unit legislation in your rezoning, that you'll say, I could build 15 stories tall. No, you have to hold them to the point that they say rezoning, community board, planning board went on record and say no buildings could be built no higher than 5 stories tall in your M1 or M2 or R6 or mixed use. So we're going to hold that. Let the politicians know that it is time to stop going into the developer's pocket and getting money under the table to allow them to do what the hell they want to do. We got to stop that.
So can I respond?
And if you're honest and truthful politician or legislature, you're going to stand to your ground.
Okay. May I retort?
Go ahead.
Okay, so Mr. Joseph, I heard that in your introduction that you've been sitting on land use committees for quite some time.
Yes.
Can you tell me what is the maximum height of buildings that are allowed in our community now?
It all depends on the zone. If it's an M1.
No. I'm asking you a simple question. What is the height restriction on our buildings in our community now?
Where are the buildings built?
You don't know. You don't know. So the height
restriction. I do know. Anywhere that's a mixed use, you cannot go no more than 6 stories tall. Period.
Okay. So then if you cannot go more than 6 stories tall, there is nothing that needs to be done. Right? You do not need to legislate that because that legislation already exists. You cannot go more than 6 stories in this community. Period.
Louis.
So let's just leave it. Let's just leave it right there because
Louis.
no. This is I asked.
What I'm telling you. You asked me a question. Let me give you 2
stories is the maximum you can build.
Whenever the developers come in to the Housing and Land Use Committee, they propose something and tell you, give me ABC, I'll give you 5% of the building.
Yeah, but you can't legislate. So
the developers going to come and tell you that.
You cannot. Let's just stop this. Let's just stop this nonsense. Let's just stop this nonsense. You cannot change.
Hold on.
You cannot change.
Yeah.
You cannot change as much as you want to do it. You cannot change zoning law that's been in place since 1961 for every community, every neighborhood in New York City, because you want to stop the transfer of development rights to a developer that he is legally in his right to purchase if he has a seller. That is impossible. Wait. Excuse me. What you're talking about is down zoning. Let's use the right words. What you're talking about is down zoning.
I'm telling you right now, it happened in my district here on Community Board 4.
And we understand.
Can I say
About the housing and building codes than the rest of us, because that's what you've been doing professionally. You have a degree in all of that. That's great. I think the opportunity, to your point, is to educate the community about some of these terms, right, that we're using and throwing around.
Right. Yes.
And let's leave it at that, right? If you're making a point about what Cyril's trying to get at, which I think is maybe you're trying to say we need to have a law that makes it illegal everywhere. I'm not really sure, but I think
that's what we need to do.
No, sir, you're this is a mistake. This is not possible.
Okay.
Yes, let me tell you. I stopped it on the Broadway corridor. We brought Community Board 3, 1, and 4. Came in and we passed law that on the Broadway strip, which separate Bedside and Bushwick, you cannot go no higher than 6 stories. There's a gentleman right there at the corner of Linden and Broadway. Came in there because the property was not owned by HPD or government property. He purchased the property from the Pedros and he wanted to build a 26 unit. And I stopped him. I put a wrench in him. I said, no, you cannot do it. And right now the land is still stopped.
So what did you do? How did you stop him, Cyril, in that case? Even though I don't think that's in the 45th district, way down on Broadway, but what did you do that could be a model for how people can...
I went back to when the Housing and Land Use Committee came at Community Board 4 and tell me cannot do it. Right then, Community Board 17, there was a building that was supposed to go up on a certain property right down East 98th Street. And when the guy bought the property, Farrell Lewis told him, yes, you could build your building there at 8-story tall. I said, no, you cannot do it. Because that's the 5-school zone. So I am not just advocating on behalf of Bedside and Bushwick. I'm advocating on the entire Brooklyn because all community board, housing and land use have a special zone.
Yeah. I think that's the takeaway, right? Like whatever is done in this district or whatever district, we have to look at it as a city-wide solution, not a one-off district-wide solution. Go ahead. You had your hand up for a little bit, and then we have to start wrapping up and tell people why they should put you first in their ballot come June 22nd. So go ahead.
Definitely. I'm just going to make this real quick. I do agree. We need to stop rezoning. Right. We've seen what happened, with rezoning attempts throughout New York. You look at what just happened with Industry City. Look at the fight that happened at Sunset Park that I helped, was an ally with and was in solidarity with. We also do need to protect the air rights, of our community as well, too. But then also we need to protect our commercial tenants as well. We need to pass the Small Business Job Survival Act, which will not only protect, our small businesses, but that then also protects our workers as well, too. And that's all I just wanted to put out there. And we can move on to the next thing.
Amen. That's right. That's good.
I think the next thing is going to be, why people should rank you first on the ballot when it comes time to vote on June 22nd. But in terms of what I've been hearing, a lot of the themes tonight, there's just for folks who joined late, it seems everyone had reached a consensus around trying to find money to do more outreach for the youth, people with mental health, because those um, are some of the key issues we need to address, right? We talked a little bit about controlling the NYPD budget, at the local level. I don't think we reached a consensus on how exactly we would do that. Everyone has a different approach to it. So it'll be interesting to see who actually makes it to the council and is able to get folks on the bandwagon to help them push through that legislation. We touched a little bit on community engagement. I heard things about the God Squad, like working with different nonprofits and community organizations to try to show strength in numbers, right, to get legislation pushed through. So again, it sounds like for all of you, that'll be part of your strategy if elected. And then last but not least, this idea of providing economic aid to homeowners, small businesses, people in general coming out of this pandemic. Yeah, we didn't really talk through some of the solutions you would propose, but everyone agrees that these need to be addressed. So the air rights, zoning, really a hot button issue, obviously, because a lot of feeling, as everyone could see, between Lou, Anthony, and Cyril. Everyone has an idea of exactly what needs to get done and how to work with the city to address these high rises that are going up at the expense of people in the neighborhood who can't afford them. So again, check these candidates' websites to just read up more on what it is that they're proposing and how they'll make these things happen. Before I go to the very last question of the evening, you guys brought up in different questions the idea of controlling your discretionary budget. And so it's only fair, I think, to ask, without mentioning the current council members' own use of her budget and how that's gone, who exactly would you fund in the district? What exactly would your discretionary funding pot go to? If you could name your top three, please, really quickly.
Who want to
Cyril,
go first?
you want to go ahead?
I will go first if you want me to.
Yes, please.
My top priority in discretionary funding is protecting green space. That's number one. Number two is providing for the vocational training center. And the third one is youth and education. Fourth one is putting money into mental health. And I will leave the rest.
Okay, yeah, because that was four and we were looking for three.
Yeah.
We want to give people time. Lou or Anthony, either one of you, what would your top three beneficiaries be of your discretionary funding budget?
Anthony?
All right, I'll hop into this. Definitely, I do agree with youth engagement, youth outreach, more jobs and more opportunities for the youth, but then also more mentorship as well, too, for the youth. We've basically had a lot of these programs, their funding been cut throughout the community. Most of it's been retaliatory, but then also most of it's been due to misappropriated funds. We also have to look at many of the organizations that provide critical services to single parents, especially single mothers, but then also provided to our seniors as well, too, when it comes to mental health services, when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to food, food insecurities and so forth. The next thing is to make sure, I do agree with Mr. Joseph in regards to, vocational training center. We have to look at the fact of that we have to make sure that we provide budget equity, across the board, for many of these organizations, because each of them play a key part. Let's look at Life of Hope, for example, that provides a major service, to many of our community members, especially those who are Haitian community members. And then you look at organizations like the Christopher Rose Empowerment organization. You look at East Flatbush Village and many other organizations that literally work with the youth and provide such critical services and resources to them. We need more of that. We need to make sure they are all adequately funded because they all provide wraparound services for everyone. You know, moving together with organizations and provide them with that funding like that, we'll be able to get, you know, to hit on many of the issues that exist right now in our district, especially during this COVID pandemic.
Lou, go ahead.
So I would use my discretionary fund, one, to build on senior services and to create entrepreneurial enterprises that are selectively addressing the issues in our aging community. We want to get those people on digital platforms. We want to get them the supplies, and we want to give them the services that they need. So I would focus my first budget priority on providing adequate transportation to seniors, on providing food distribution to seniors at home, and to provide them with essential services to help them maintain their homes. Second thing I would do is what I mentioned earlier, is I would start an initiative around what I call D45ers, which is a dedicated squad that would function through an HOA to address the garbage cleanup issue. So that would be a permanent solution within our community. That would be something that I think needs to be sustained, and it needs to be addressed immediately. And finally, the third thing I would do is what's called youth tutoring and mentoring programs. I work with an organization called Children of Promise. I am on their board. And what they do is they provide services to children of incarcerated parents. So most of these tutoring and mentoring programs focus on children at a very early age where they're still impressionable, where they're not, influenced by teens or have access to their own kind of social life. And we bring mentors to them. We provide guidance. We give them tutoring. We give them educational support, and we put them on the right path. So I would invest in organizations that do that kind of work, because you need to get them while they're young. It's very hard to remediate children when they strayed off the path. So we need to provide spaces within churches. We need to provide food. We need to provide critical support for working parents so that they know where their kids are after hours when they're at work, and they know where to pick them up, and they're fed and they're cared for. So those would be my 3 budget priorities.
Yeah, and I think that says a lot about what it is you all would bring to the seat if you are to be the victor after the primaries, in terms of, you know, the ranked ballot choices and everything. So we really are going to close it out, and we didn't have time to get into some of the other points that you all brought up. So maybe we can do this again as we get closer to the election in June. But I did want to thank all of you for coming on today and sharing some of your thoughts. In case you missed it at the beginning, you all can go to the candidates' websites to read more about them. You could go to cyriljoseph.com, anthonybeckford.com, or lou445.com to learn more about what you've heard here.
May I interrupt for a little bit? As you give me the address to the website, you all have my website wrong.
Okay,
my website is cyrilfjoseph.com.
Okay. Yep, there's an F in there. My apologies.
Because mine is Cyril Joseph, so mine is Cyril F.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for making that correction. We appreciate it.
No problem.
So with that, everyone, thank you for joining. Thank you again, candidates, for joining. We will be in touch and follow up on a lot of the issues you brought up through our reporting at the Haitian Times, which is, of course, haitiantimes.com. Please continue to read us and engage with us on social. And if you have tips or ideas, some of your questions that we didn't get to address tonight at this forum, please send them on to submissions@haitiantimes.com, and we'll look for ways to address them. Again,
I want to make one announcement.
What is it, Cyril?
Remember, I asked you a question at the starting.
I'm sorry?
in Creole. In Creole. Because I
Okay.
want to reach my Creole speaking people. Tout gens Haïti, non, moi c'est Cyril Joseph. Et
Mhm.
demandé pour vote numéro 1 en juin 22,
22 juin. Mhm.
22 juin pour voter pour Cyril Joseph numéro 1 pour
Okay.
City Council member. Merci beaucoup et bonsoir.
So who should they vote for as 2, 3, 4 on the ballot? Who would you recommend?
Huh? I didn't listen. I ain't gonna tell him nobody.
All
I
right.
can go to Hunter and them to vote Cyril Joseph #1.
All right. Well, everyone, have a good night. Thanks again for
Thank you so much for having us. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Mac. Thank you to the Haitian Times.
Take
Bonsoir.
care, everyone. Be safe.